Hello everyone, welcome to this webinar. My name is Nicola Favretto. I'm a research fellow at the University of Leeds. Today we will talk about how we link land conservation to community development in ecological restoration. And we will ground our learning journey in the work that we've been carrying out in South Africa between 2016 and now. I believe this is going to be an exciting journey because we will start with outlining the academic grounding of our initial research, and we will conclude by showing how we have been taking our findings forward with the view to help local practitioners advancing with their projects and also to inform policy development. So let's start with a brief outline of this webinar. We will start by explaining why we have chosen South Africa as a focus. We will talk about the land policy outlook in South Africa and links to the research key objectives. Then we will outline our research aim and make some links to the broader sustainable development goals. We will then present in detail our two case studies. Then we will outline our research methods and the methodological framework that we used in the research. We will then outline our key findings and then present our efforts toward implementation of the findings and with a view to inform policy making, and we will share some future perspectives for the future work. Okay, so let's start. First of all, I would like to refer you to this journal paper which outlines in detail what I'm going to show you in the next slides. It's a manuscript published in the Sustainability Journal titled Links Between Climate Change Mitigation, Adaptation and Development in Land Policy and Ecosystem Restoration Projects, Lessons from South Africa. So first of all, why South Africa? South Africa as a country is facing some severe land degradation challenges. This photo is quite self-explanatory. I took it in the southern part of the country in the Eastern Cape, and this level of degradation is mostly a result of mismanagement of land. This is just one of the types of degradation that are occurring in the country. There are also some other instances where the land is not as dry as in this photo, but we observe land that has been losing vegetations because of the excessive grazing of small animals, mostly goats and sheep, in certain areas. And when we talk more broadly about the development goals that the world is trying to achieve, it is quite clear that to achieve the sustainable development goals, we need to keep our land healthy and productive. Because with land as the one that you see in the photo, there is not much hope to sustain the life of local populations or to develop any economic activity. And now let's talk about the land policy in South Africa. The sustainable development goals in the country are addressed through ecological restoration and particularly through labor-intensive activities. So basically, the policymakers recognize that ecological restoration is a way to help achieve various sustainable development goals. And it's also a way to create activities that generate jobs. And I have indicated a quote here from an interview with the policymakers that summarizes this message quite well. The person said, "We have water problems, we need to restore land, there is a carbon market, and there are opportunities to create jobs and fight global warming. So that is why the South African policymakers are sustaining various ecological restoration activities in the countries to achieve multiple goals. I'll give you a specific example here of a program that kicked off in the late 90s and which is called Expanded Public Works Programs, which basically has three key components. They promote climate mitigation activities, mostly through planting or recovering thicket vegetation. And here in this photo you see this plant is called spekboom, and it's a plant that is incredibly resilient and can survive quite well in extremely dry environments. So the government programs are basically aiming to plant large areas of land with the spekboom plant to recover thicket and generate jobs. Second component, climate adaptation. So an example in this photo is the effort of these government programs to build water gabions, which are basically barriers, as you can see here, where they bring rocks together, which are then wrapped up in a metal net. And these barriers aim to stop or at least reduce the intensive water flow that goes through, particularly when it rains, and that is a major driver of soil erosion. And third dimension, development. So in both of the activities that I've shown before, a key component is that they are labor intensive, and therefore these programs aim to create as many jobs as possible. Now, I would like to also refer to another key policy program, which is called Subtropical Thicket Restoration Program, which since 2004 aimed to catalyze restoration investments across 1 million hectares of degraded land. Here I show a photo where the difference between degraded and non-degraded land is quite striking. What happens here, there is a fence where you see this line. On the left hand, the land is intact and rich of spekboom thicket because it has not been grazed. And on the right hand, the land has been degraded probably because of the overstocking, so keeping too many goats and sheep grazing on that part of the land. There are also other government programs that are achieving similar objectives, and all of these programs aim to work through three key dimensions, which I shown earlier: promoting mitigation to climate change, adaptation to climate change, and development. So, just as a brief overview of the expanded public works program that I've shown earlier, it is composed by various programs, sub-programs called Working For. They have Working For Ecosystems, which aims to reverse environmental degradation through ecological restoration. They have Working For Water, which aims to foster labor-intensive community development for environmental conservation. And they have Working For Land. So they are all programs that aim to achieve similar objectives in an integrated way. Then we have the Subtropical Thicket Restoration Program, and then similar objectives are pursued in the National Development Plan and in the National Framework for Sustainable Development. So, the aim of our initial research when we started a few years ago was to investigate how all these policy drivers can support the delivery at the project level of these three key dimensions of adaptation, mitigation, and development. And in doing so, we had a strong focus in evaluating the perspectives of the local community. And again, the achievement of these three dimensions through ecological restorations is key to achieve the majority of the Sustainable Development Goals. First, above all, Sustainable Development Goal number 15, which is about life on land, but also a range of other ones. Number 1, no poverty. We have all the links to the development dimensions. Access to clean water, food security and zero hunger, climate actions, etc. So we've been choosing 2 case studies that pursue ecological restoration in South Africa. One is called Living Lands and the other one is called Jobs for Carbon. If you look at the map of Africa, you see we are here in the southern part in South Africa, and specifically our case studies are located in the southern part of South Africa, in the Eastern Cape, Living Lands, and in the Western Cape, Jobs for Carbon. Now let's start with our first case study, Living Lands, and outline a bit their scope of work. Living Lands is an organization that has been implementing about 90 projects since 2009 across the Eastern Cape for a rough total of $3.3 million. And what do? They pursue ecological rehabilitation by facilitating collaborations between people who work together to solve a shared challenge. So this is applied to living landscapes. The organization understands living landscapes as a variety of healthy ecological, agricultural, and social systems which are managed together to function sustainably. So this is the key goal of operation of this organization. An example of the work they do on the ground, one technique that they adopt is called brush packing. So they basically collect dried branches and spread them over some areas in order to keep some shading and retain a bit of water and create an environment that is more conducive for the plants to grow. And you see in the photo here on the right hand, as a result of the brush packing, there is a higher level of green vegetation being able to survive, when in contrast to what you see on the left part, where it stays completely dry. Another technique that they use is installing silt traps to protect existing ecological infrastructure. So you see this little white barrier here. It's installed particularly in steep soil to stop or reduce the runoff of soil, particularly when in the rain, when the water is flowing down. And they combine it with the brush packing in order to further create an environment where the little speckboom plants will be able to survive. And sometimes they use it to build it around trees, like this one. This one is a very old tree, thousands of years old. So it's an existing ecological infrastructure that they are trying to protect, because when you lose a tree that is several thousands years old, there's no way to get it back. And then they plant speckboom for thicket restoration, and this was done mostly in collaboration with the government programs that I outlined earlier. Another activity promoted by Living Lands is essential oil production. So they help in the local landowners to remove the small animals, goats and sheep from their land, and instead growing some lavender or rosemary that you can see here in the tree nursery and then planted in the plain field here, that can be used to produce essential oils. And the project helped building an infrastructure here, which is a facility that is used for the essential oil extraction. Now let's look at our other case study, Jobs for Carbon. As the title says, Jobs for Carbon, the project has two main goals, which is job creation through the planting of the spec boom plants and carbon sequestration. They are pretty much focused on the human aspect of their work. So in terms of human capital, they are committed to train a high amount of workers, increasing their skills to promote local economic development, and they're really focused on community upliftment. So providing benefits to the village and sustain household livelihoods. And all of these workers are then employed in the planting of spec boom. In doing so, the Jobs for Carbon use an approach where they first carry out some fine-scale mapping of potential restoration sites, and then they carry out some baseline carbon assessments to assess the potential for soil organic carbon sequestration, and then they plant the spec boom. So as you can see in this next slide, they are also focused in implementing some techniques to stop soil erosion. For example, they install erosion sausages and adopt some techniques that are similar to Living Lands, but the main difference between the two projects is that Jobs for Carbon is mostly focused on these two dimensions: job creation and spec boom planting, while Living Lands is more focused on the exploration and adoption of wider ecological restoration techniques. Before we go ahead, I would like to quickly go back to our initial aim of the research. We said that our research will investigate how all the policy drivers that we have outlined in the first few slides can support the delivery at the project levels, so in our case studies, of adaptation, mitigation, and development, with the focus on the perspective of the local community. How did we achieve this? We used mixed methods. So we interviewed a total of 63 people, and we carried out semi-structured interviews at the community level, both with the landowners involved with the projects and with their field workers. We have carried out semi-structured interviews with experts, so the managers of these projects, and as well as with the policymakers and universities involved with the projects. We've also been visiting the project sites with the local community through participatory site visits, and we've also been discussing similar issues in a group setting through focus group discussions. And this is a screenshot of our methodological framework. So how do we bring all of that diverse data together in order to analyze it? We developed a framework which is focused across the three key dimensions that we are assessing: adaptation, mitigation, and development. And for each of these dimensions, we have developed a range of indicators that would allow us to assess how each of these projects perform. So, for example, for adaptation, we have structural indicators that look at the built environment and ponding, natural barriers, soil and water conservation. If you remember what we've shown in the earlier photos, the erosion sausages or the silt traps are an example of this, or the water gabions of the government programs. In terms of social adaptations, we have educational dimensions, informational dimensions, and behavioral. And on the behavioral, just to give a more detailed example, we have changing cropping and livestock practices for livelihood diversification. And as I said earlier, one of the objectives of Living Lands is to help the farmers to remove their small stock from the land and grow lavender for essential oil production instead. So this is an example of changing cropping and livestock practices. Then we have mitigation indicators that look mostly at the amounts of tree planted and soil restored and carbon being sequestered. And then we have the development indicators that include the human components of skills building, enhancement of knowledge, training, diversification of livelihood. We have the social component of development, so building a sense of community and membership, empowering the local community through the project work. Then we have the natural components, so improving access to land and water and so on. Physical component, infrastructure and production equipment, and that essential oil extraction facility that was built by the project is an example of that. And then we have the financial component of development, so savings and access to regular income, for example, through the employment generated through these activities. On our findings, first of all, this table shows for each of these dimensions where there is an overlapping across the interviews from the project developers, the workers, the landowners, and the policymakers. And as you can see here, interestingly enough, this table shows that there is a substantial match in the benefits reported by the project developers and the policymakers, and in the benefits perceived by the project beneficiaries, by the local community. So they are more or less all talking a similar story. And our study has shown that this climate and land policy and these projects really have the potential to foster what we call triple wins. So achievement of benefits for climate adaptation, climate mitigation, and development. But the simultaneous achievement of these three dimensions is limited, is hampered by priorities that are often divergent. First of all, short versus long-term employment. On the one hand, the government programs are focused on creating the highest amount possible of jobs, but these jobs are often short-term, just normally using 3 weeks contracts, versus the need of the project to employ workers that are skilled and knowledgeable about the organization and their activities, and then they would be able to work them over a longer time frame. Obviously, This is challenging because the amount of funding available is limited, so it's not easy for the organization to employ full-time workers on a long-term basis. But the capacity to generate longer-term jobs is what actually triggers more meaningful and substantial, sustainable and human development in the long term. Divergent priority number 2, short versus long-term restoration plans and funding agreements. Again, here there is a contrast between the funder that can be government or international organizations that is willing to fund certain activities and is expecting to see almost immediate impacts. So the project will say, I will fund you for 2 years, and in 2 years you have to plant a certain amount of trees, and I want to see the land being turned green again. On the other hand, the project as implementer is in the need of experimenting constantly new techniques and trying to find a way to make it work on the ground, and in all of this managing the relationship with the local community. And we all know that ecological restoration is a long-term effort. It takes decades to turn the land green again, and we cannot expect to see immediate benefits in just a few years. So this divergency creates some difficulties for the projects to focus their actions on the ground, keeping that type of long-term view. Number 3, sectoral versus multi-sectoral and flexible approaches to restoration. Again, funding is often focused on from a sectoral perspective on a limited range of activities. One project might aim to just plant trees, so as many trees as possible will be planted. Another project might aim to create jobs. Another project might aim to improve community, to foster community upliftment. There is a need for more flexible approaches to ecological restoration. If the practitioners on the ground are enabled to operate from multiple perspectives and to test and experiment different techniques, they will be able in the longer term to achieve more substantial restoration, resulting in higher levels of carbon mitigation, or of climate mitigation, of climate adaptation and development. As long as the project will be asked to work from a narrower sectoral perspectives, there will be a higher difficulty in achieving longer term results. Number 4, the need for enabling environments. For example, all these policies are pursuing mitigation. And the reasoning behind it is that there is a carbon market, so the carbon market might be a source of long-term income that will be able to sustain the projects in the long term after the short-term funding from the government is ended. But as a matter of fact, what our interviews have shown is that in South Africa, as in many other countries, the carbon market is almost non-existent, and there is a need of enabling legislative environments, for example, a carbon tax, which has, by the way, been recently approved in the country, to really allow the carbon market to kick off. Number 5, institutional arrangements. The situation so far is that there is a kind of a disconnect between the capacity to implement activities on the ground, the capacity to monitor the activities, and even when there is some monitoring in place, the capacity to use the information generated in the monitoring to inform future policy planning. So there is a need to put in place a more integrated system that links the monitoring to planning to allow the prioritization of current and future actions and then their implementation. And the last point is on the need to focus on small scale and business-driven and long-term approaches to restoration. Short-term funding can be useful to kick off and start some activities, but in the long term, these activities need to be able to self-sustain. And they will be able to self-sustain only if there is a business component that will generate somehow some revenues from whatever activity is implemented on the ground. And therefore, the view should be a long-term view. It cannot be a 1 or 2 year short-term project view. And also focus on the small scale, because what we have observed here is that the great potential here comes from the role of local champions, local people that know their environments, they are attached to their environments, and they have that motivation to mobilize their whole community and work all together towards a shared goal. And you can achieve this only if you keep it local and small scale. When the activity becomes decentralized and gets far from the locals, it will lose some of its meaning, and the people will not be as committed anymore. All of these perspectives and these policy recommendations are summarized in the briefing note that is shown in this slide. So for more detail on this, please feel free to check this out. But now, we have presented our initial research, our findings. We have raised a lot of constructive critiques and recommendations, but how do we take it further? How do we start implementing some of these recommendations? And that has been the focus of our more recent work, turning the recommendations into action. And how we have pursued that in the past year was through knowledge exchange. So we have designed a knowledge exchange to upscale all the good practices that we have observed in social ecological restoration in the country through our 2 case studies. And we have focused again on the local perspectives. So, as we state in the title here, what can project interventions learn from field workers? So we designed the knowledge exchange with the aim to inform both practice and policy. First of all, practice, the aim was to identify and share the good practices in these social ecological restoration projects. And second, on policy, the aim was to guide the future environmental policies in the country. Our knowledge exchange is comprised by 3 key activities. Activity number 1, fieldwork. We have carried out a learning journey between the 2 different case studies that involved an exchange of the staff of the 2 projects and their workers. So as you see in the photos here, the staff and the workers, they have been traveling to to the location of the other project site, and they've been working together in the field and teaching to each other and learning from each other for a few days. And the interaction and the amount of learning and inspiration was really, really remarkable here. These perspectives were then analyzed and discussed further in our activity number 2, which was a local workshop. So sometime after the implementation of the fieldwork, we have gathered all the people together again, this time in a workshop room, where with the aim to share their experiences about the fieldwork and summarize the key lessons. So the workshop was highly interactive and involved lots of exercises where people had to discuss and rank the importance of the key impacts of the knowledge exchange, define the key lessons that they have learned, which lessons can be transferred to other projects or to other locations, what are the challenges in transferring these lessons, and so on. And finally, all the knowledge generated here was brought up to the higher international level. And this is activity number 3. We targeted a big international conference which took place in Cape Town in 2019, which is the 8th World Conference on Ecological Restoration, where we delivered 2 main sessions. One was a symposium that brought together multi-level stakeholders that are involved with the planning, with the design, with the implementation, and with the monitoring of the restoration programs and projects in the country. So if you see in the photo on the left, here we have our key speakers of the symposium. It's me in the middle, and then you have a couple of practitioners, so managers of the projects from the ground. You have one farmer involved with one of the projects that shared her experiences. You have a couple of staff of a national university. You have one director from the Department of Environmental Affairs, so policy maker, and you have a manager of the United Nations Development Program, who is the big international funder that is sustaining some of these projects. All these people were brought here together. This is a photo of the audience to discuss the key findings that we have been producing and generating over the years through the academic research and the practical knowledge exchange, and to find collectively a way to take ecological restoration action forward. We followed the bottom-up approach, so everything started from the experiences of the farmers and the practitioners on the ground, going up to the national level perspective. And by doing this, we synthesized the lessons that were learned by the practitioners and the community beneficiaries, by the scientists, by the international funders, and by the national policymakers in the pursuit of shared restoration and development goals. So you see, by linking national to community level perspectives and to case study implementation, this symposium aimed to act as a bridge between science, policy, and practice. And to finish, we had another session in the international conference, which is a workshop that we organized and delivered, which was a role-playing exercise which simulated the co-design of a community-driven landscape rehabilitation intervention. So the participants of the workshop were asked to wear the hat of the key stakeholders that we have from the real-life examples here in the symposium, And in playing different roles, they were asked to interact together towards the development and the co-design of a community-driven rehabilitation intervention. And this has enabled to apply our theoretical understanding to a practical case study exercise in the form of a virtual learning journey towards conservation and community development. So by now you should have a quite detailed overview of how we have been trying to build the links and the understanding and the knowledge and action on linking land conservation to community development in ecological restoration in the example of South Africa. Now, what's next? This shows that this is a very long-term process. In the future, we aim to sustain a continued knowledge exchange, so build on the knowledge exchange in the past to put in place a longer term effort to keep bridging the different stakeholders at the different levels, and to co-develop and co-implement with all these local and international partners new research that will keep informing practice and policy. So this was a long journey so far, and this journey has to be continued and is foreseen to be even longer in the future. For now, I thank you very much for your attention. As usual, I hope that you found this webinar interesting and inspiring. And of course, if you have any question, please feel free to contact me to my email address indicated in the first slide. Thank you very much.